Hello boys and girls and good morning. Happy Tuesday. Did you know today was Tuesday? It is. It's the second school day of the week. And today if we were in school we'd be having lots of fun. We would be doing PE in the hall. That's what we do on Tuesdays. And we were recently doing dance and then we were going to start gymnastics. I've actually put lots of stuff on the website to keep active at home. So if you go into the school website, you could pick an activity to do today outside in the lovely weather. Today we are going to read the story Mr. Fussy from the Mr. Men collection. And this is what Mr. Fussy looks like. Do you know what fussy means? Fussy means that you don't like certain things. So let's talk about dinner. So some children might be fussy and they might not like their vegetables. So they might say, "Oh, Mammy, I don't want to eat my vegetables." And your mammy might say, "Oh, please eat them." And they might call you fussy if you're not eating your vegetables. Mr. Fussy. So I wonder what he is fussy about. Is he fussy about vegetables or is he fussy about something else? I love vegetables. I'm not fussy about them. Mr. Fussy was fussy about everything. Oh, he's not just fussy about vegetables, he's fussy about lots of things. Absolutely everything had to be neat and tidy and in its proper place. Mr. Fussy spent all day and every day rearranging his furniture and making sure the flowers grew in a straight line in his garden and trying to find specks of dust where there couldn't possibly be specks of dust, because he spent all his time making sure there weren't any specks of dust. There he is in his very neat garden. One fine morning, Mr. Fussy was having breakfast. He was very fussy about what he ate. He opened the marmalade pot. "Oh," he exclaimed, "it has bits in it." And he spent the rest of the morning separating the bits from the marmalade. Or if you prefer, the marmalade from the bits. Fussy old fusspot, people used to call him. I love marmalade, especially with the bits. It's delicious. Have you ever had marmalade on toast? It's really tasty. Then Mr. Fussy went out into his garden and spent the rest of the day straightening out all the blades of grass on his lawn. Fussy old fusspot. That's ridiculous. Straightening out all the strands of grass on his lawn. That would take forever. That evening, Mr. Fussy was in his kitchen, ironing his shoelaces, when he heard a crash outside. "What's to do?" he murmured to himself and hurried out to investigate. There he is, with his iron in his hand. An iron is hot. We should never touch an iron. There, with a broken garden gate in one hand, an old battered suitcase in the other, and a sheepish grin on his face, stood an untidy person. "Mr. Clumsy!" "Whoops," he said, holding up the garden gate. "It came off in my hand." "Who?" spluttered Mr. Fussy, looking in horror at his garden gate. "Are you?" He looks quite similar to Mr. Fussy. He just looks untidy. "I'm Mr. Clumsy," replied the untidy person, grinning, and he stepped forward to shake Mr. Fussy's hand, but tripped over and fell on the lawn. Oh no, he fell on the lawn, and Mr. Fussy had just organised it, all the grass he'd straightened out the strands. "My grass!" cried Mr. Fussy. "My straight grass, you've bent it." And he got down on his hands and knees and started straightening the grass. "But who are you?" he asked over his shoulder, "and why are you here?" "I'm your cousin," replied Mr. Clumsy, "your long-lost cousin from Australia. I've come to visit you." What a lovely thing to do, to visit your cousin. "Aren't you pleased to see me?" continued Mr. Clumsy cheerfully, knocking over a flower or two as he got up and picked up his suitcase, knocking over another flower or two or three. Mr. Fussy, quite obviously, was not pleased to see him. "You'd better come in," he muttered. He's inviting him in, but he's not too happy to have him in his house. He probably thinks he's going to make the house quite messy. "I say," remarked Mr. Clumsy, looking through the front door of Mr. Fussy's house. "I say, what a neat place you have here." As he stepped inside and tripped over his shoelaces, he often does, and knocked over a chair and dropped his suitcase and fell in an untidy heap on the floor. "Whoops," he said. Mr. Fussy shut his eyes and heaved a sigh and groaned silently to himself. "Do you see his laces are undone? Can you point to them for me?" "Yes, well done. He needs to tie his laces. Maybe he's not able. He could ask Mr. Fussy to tie them. I'd say he could." Later that evening, after Mr. Fussy had cooked them a meal, and after Mr. Clumsy had helped him with the washing up, 2 broken plates, they sat down to talk. There he is. His laces are still undone. And he broke 2 plates. Goodness me. Mr. Fussy sat, as he always did, in a neat and tidy fashion. Mr. Clumsy sat, as he always did, in a not so neat and tidy fashion. "How long are you staying?" asked Mr. Fussy. "Oh, I don't know," grinned Mr. Clumsy. "A few days, a week, a year." "I haven't decided." There he is, sitting on the chair, clumsily. When he awoke in the morning, Mr. Fussy jumped out of bed and went into his bathroom. "Oh no," he gasped. "Oh no." Oh yes, Mr. Clumsy had been in there before him. The towels lay in a heap on the floor. The bath was full of water. There were pools of water all over the bathroom floor and half a tube of toothpaste. What a mess. Mr. Fussy made it all neat and tidy as quickly as he could. That's the toothpaste all over the floor. Oh, what a pity. It's all wasted now, and that's very important for brushing our teeth. Then Mr. Fussy hurried downstairs. "Morning," said his cousin cheerfully. "I've cooked you breakfast. Sit down." There was an awful mess everywhere. "There we are," said Mr. Clumsy, carrying a plate of fried eggs, broken fried eggs, towards the table. "Breakfast." And then he tripped over his shoelaces again, and then the eggs flew through the air, and then they landed all over Mr. Fussy. Sticky, greasy, yellow fried eggs. "Whoops," said Mr. Clumsy. He doesn't look too happy. Not at all. After a week, Mr. Fussy's house didn't look like Mr. Fussy's house at all anymore. Look at it. Oh, goodness me. The windows are broken. The door is broken. The garden's in a state. But after 2 weeks, Mr. Clumsy decided to move on. "Thank you for having me," he said to Mr. Fussy. "It was very nice to see," replied Mr. Fussy politely. But what he was thinking was, "It's very nice to see you going." "Cheerio," said Mr. Clumsy, and off he went with his battered old suitcase. "Goodbye," called Mr. Fussy, really meaning good riddance. I wonder where he's off to. Another cousin, perhaps? Then Mr. Fussy fussed around his house as he'd never fussed before. Fussy old fusspot. Polishing and mending and repairing and straightening and sorting out and cleaning and putting everything back exactly as it had been before Mr. Clumsy had even come to stay. He even dusted the flowers in the garden. Look at him, dusting the flowers. You don't dust flowers. So silly. That evening, Mr. Fussy was in his kitchen, polishing an egg, when he heard a crash outside. "Oh no," he groaned, "not Mr. Clumsy back again. It can't be, it mustn't be, it isn't." And it wasn't. It was somebody else. Somebody who had just walked straight through Mr. Fussy's garden gate. somebody who can't help having little accidents, somebody you may have met before. I wonder who it is. That's Mr. Fussy in his kitchen. Let's see who it is. Hello, smiled Mr. Bump. I've come to visit. Oh, that is ridiculous. Mr. Bump has come to visit now. His poor house isn't going to be neat and tidy for long, because Mr. Bump, what will he do? He will bump into everything. You're right. Well done, boys and girls. So our song today is Two Little Dicky Birds. So to get your dicky birds, we have Peter and we have Paul. Are you ready? I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Two little dicky birds sitting on a wall. One named Peter, one named Paul. Fly away, Peter, fly away, Paul. Come back, Peter, come back, Paul. Very good. And in our class, do you remember who has a brother called Peter? Brandon does, you're right. Brandon has a big brother called Peter, and Brandon loves when we sing that song. So boys and girls, I will see you tomorrow, and it has been great chatting to you.